Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So we're going to be talking about pine martens and how they are an unlikely ally for our red squirrels. So just a quick start, just a few housekeeping things before we start. Warm welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are doing this talk as part of our Ulster Wildlife Members Talk series. And so there's been a great uptake for this season for all of our talks. So there's lots of other ones still coming on if you check out our website and find out some more. And please let us know if you're enjoying them on our social medias as well. So that feedback is very important for us to make sure that we keep doing what we're doing. Very warm welcome to everyone who's especially for members tonight. Thank you very much for all of your continued support over the last couple of years. Without your support, Ulster Wildlife wouldn't exist and we wouldn't be able to do all the conservation work that we do. So thank you very, very much for all of your continued memberships. So tonight we're going to do the talk. It's going to be about 30 minutes. It's probably going to go about 35 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So if you would like, please put your questions in the chat. It's quite handy on Zoom actually, because you can do it as you go along so you don't forget anything on the way through. And just as we note, this talk is going to be recorded tonight, and it's going to be shared with Ulster Wildlife members and also people who have signed up for the talk but couldn't make it tonight. So if you don't want to appear on the recording, please keep your video off. And also as an FYI, we're just going to keep everyone muted for the duration of the talk, just so it all runs smoothly. Okay, dokes, well, we'll get on to it, and I hope you enjoy. So, pine martens. What is a pine marten, right? So whenever I was talking to my friends and family, I was doing this talk, many of them were very surprised. Like they didn't know about pine martens. They didn't know they existed in Northern Ireland. And that's not too surprising because they are very elusive and rare. I'm just going to start the night off by putting a poll in the chat. Can you put that in for me, please, Katie? There we go. Have you ever seen a pine marten? So very simple, yes or no. There should be, well, we got 60 odd people in here at the minute. How many people have seen pine martens? Oh my word. I didn't expect that many people to have seen pine martens. That's brilliant. Oh. A few more. I think that's about, oh yeah, a few more coming in. Goodness, didn't expect that. Well, whenever I show this image to people, they are often very surprised that pine martens are around. They describe them as kind of unusual animals. I've heard some people describe them as like foxes, a cross between foxes and squirrels. I've even heard a family member of mine describe a pine marten as a cross between a cat and a sausage dog, which I think is quite an amusing comparison. Brilliant, that poll there is done very well. Do you want to finish that up for us there, Katie? Wonderful. Okay, so I have 41% of our attendees tonight have seen a pine marten, which is class. Did not expect that at all. That's a really good sign. Actually, maybe a little bit of a spoiler for the rest of the talk. Who knows? That's absolutely fantastic. Normally, it's only one or two people in a room, so it's great to see so many people in this room seeing one of our most elusive mammals. So, if pine martens don't belong to the cat or dog family, they're not, weird looking squirrels or weird looking foxes. What are they? There we go. Ha. They are mustelids. Okay. So what are mustelids? Mustelids are small to medium-sized mammals. There's over 70 different species of mustelid all around the world, and they're generally kind of cylindrical shaped carnivores. Very tube shaped. That kind of tube shape helps them get into nooks and crannies, helps them hunt for prey, and also helps them to hide away too. And so I have here an image of the mustelids that you can see in Northern Ireland. We've got otters up there in the top left, stoat top right, we've got the pine marten middle, and of course our cute little badger, which is the emblem of Ulster Wildlife, down there at the bottom. And on the far left, I've also included American mink, which is found in Northern Ireland, although it's an invasive species that was introduced from the United States of America. In Britain, there's also pine martens and weasels, but actually they are absent from the island of Ireland. So the wind of the willows doesn't fully apply over here. And as you can see from the image, or I'm sure most of you know, that certain species have adapted to live in certain places. So otters and mink are generally aquatic and live in rivers and sea. The stoat and the badger are found in our hedgerows, burrows, and the pine martens, as you might have guessed from the name, live in woodlands. They are an arboreal predator, and they have really strong claws which help them climb trees. And you can see here in this wee picture, there's two there showing off their climbing skills. The one on the right is a wee kit looking very, very cute. And the one on the left there looks like I've said something egregious to it. It's taken offense. It's not very happy. But you can see that they're both very, very adept climbers. Pine martens in this country aren't exclusive to woodlands, though. They're often found traveling over open ground, and sometimes in upland areas where there's a lack of trees. They can do well in kind of scrubby areas and nesting in kind of rocky areas too. So pine martens are about the size of a large cat. The males tend to be much bigger and much heavier than the females. So they're about 1/2 meter in length, and then their tail is another 1/4 meter on top of that as well. So their tails are actually really, really long. And their tails are long because that helps them balance in the treetops. They have lovely, dense brown fur, which keeps them nice and warm in the wintertime. And in the summertime as well, their fur actually thins out, which means that they don't overheat in the summertime. And that big bushy tail is really important in the winter too, because it keeps them nice and warm with their lovely dense fur. Whenever they're tucked up in their wee den, they wrap their tail around them like a big cat and keep themselves nice and cozy. Another distinctive feature about the pine marten is they've got this beautiful throat patch, or also known as a bib, which is kind of creamy and yellowy. Curiously, pine martens' bibs are like fingerprints. Every single one is unique to every individual pine marten. And so if you ever have the lucky chance to be able to photograph or see a pine marten on a regular basis, you can actually identify them to their individuals from the markings of their bib, where the brown kind of creeps into the cream or where the cream kind of extends over. And as you can see from that other image, they are very, very agile in the treetops. They've got their long body, which helps spread out their weight over the branches. Their big long tails, they're mentioned, their sharp claws to help them cling on. And as you can see from that image there on the far left, the one standing on its hind legs, its front paws are up in front, and you can see just how big they are and how sharp those claws are. That's not unusual behavior either for the pine martens. Another advantage of being a tube-shaped predator is whenever you're not high up in the trees, you can stand up on your hind legs, and you can see high, in this particular case, over the heather to see if there's predators coming for you or whether there's anything you can eat. So as we're talking about what they're eating, this is mostly what they're eating. Their diet's made up of lots of different stuff. Now, they are carnivores. They're in the order Carnivora, but I would actually describe them as opportunistic omnivores. The majority of their diet is other animals, predominantly small rodents, like mice and shrews, and also small birds, and even rabbits too, if they can catch them. Rabbits are a wee bit harder to catch, especially the bigger ones, so they'll often take younger rabbits. But they're opportunistic because they take advantage of different food sources that appear at different times of year. So in the autumn time, whenever our trees and bushes are laden with berries, they will gorge themselves on berries. And you can see bottom right as well, hazelnuts and seeds, they'll also take too. And then in the springtime, they will thrive on birds' eggs. So they're just opportunistic. They'll take whatever they can get. They also eat fungi in the autumn time, insects all year round, frogs whenever they're hopping around, and of course, our beloved squirrels. They will predate on squirrels as they are so agile, they can hunt in the treetops. One of the few natural predators our squirrels have. I'll come back to the relationship between pine martens and squirrels a little bit later on in this talk. So here we go. So here's another image of a pine marten climbing a tree. This is a big male. I can tell this is a big male Anyone who knows a little bit about anatomy might be able to figure out why it's a big male. But I just want to point out there, it's got this massive big bushy tail. You can just see how big that tail is in comparison to its body. It also looks out of proportion. So pine martens are mostly nocturnal animals. The other pictures you're seeing of them in the daytime, they will come out in the daytime more in the breeding season when the nights are shorter, but predominantly they are nocturnal animals. And this means that they're very, very elusive, very hard to see. And it also makes it hard for us to assess how well the population is doing. One of the things you can do if you can't see them at nighttime is to look out for signs of them during the day. And one of the key signs to see for them during the day is their scats. Scats, obviously, a very fancy scientific word for poop, because scientists can't say the word poop at all. But the pine marten scats are very, very distinctive. They're dark and twisted, and they also smell very, very sweet. Now, I've not had the pleasure of smelling them, but apparently they used to be called sweet marts because of their sweet smelling scat. I'm very glad scientists didn't stick with the naming mammals after the way their feces smell. I think that would be a very bad choice. But they smell so sweet. In fact, they're described as smelling like flowers or even sweets like Parma violets, which is quite bizarre, but quite distinctive. So not only is it a good way for us to find pine martens, but pine martens will use their scats to mark their territories, which is very important because pine martens don't really tolerate other pine martens. They like to live alone. They're solitary animals. And they have huge, huge ranges. So males will have a range between 10 and 25 kilometers squared, and females will have a smaller range between 5 and 15 kilometers squared. So I'll just use a map here to illustrate that, because that doesn't really mean anything to me. But here is a map of a 25 kilometer squared area, and this is Belfast. It covers almost all of the center of Belfast. And just to be clear, this map isn't an actual pine marten territory. Pine martens probably don't live in the center of Belfast, but this just goes to show how big of an area that they will cover, particularly the males. In this little box, there must be at least 100,000 people living in that box, but that area can only hold one dominant male pine marten. Of course, there is a time of year where they become a little more friendly, a little bit more amenable. In the late summer, the males and the females will begin to tolerate each other and come together to reproduce. Now, to be clear, this isn't a pair of mating pine martens. They don't have this kind of unusual habit. This is just a pair of young kits messing around, we rascals them. But pine martens do this really extraordinary strategy, okay? So they come together in the kind of summertime and they mate. But the female then, she will give birth in the springtime. But there's about 6-7 months there, and pine martens aren't big animals. So it doesn't take a long time for fetuses to develop. So what's going on? Well, what actually happens is after the male fertilizes the female, she holds the eggs inside her, but doesn't implant them in her womb, which means that her babies don't develop quickly. And that's really important because you don't want to have babies in the wintertime where there's less food. You also don't want to meet other pine martens in the wintertime where you can be competitive for food. So what they do is in the summertime where there's plenty of food, the males and females will come together and they will mate. The female will hold off on developing babies inside her. How she does this, I don't actually know. I'm not sure if the mechanism is determined, but that's what she does. And then in the late winter, early spring, she begins the development of the babies so that the babies are born in peak springtime whenever there's the most food around. So it's an incredible strategy and absolutely mad that an animal has the ability to do that, but it makes perfect sense for survival and being able to be the most effective parent that you can be. So the females will tend to look after the kits, as they're known, herself. She'll normally have a litter between 1 and 5 kits, which sounds really, really good. But unfortunately, they're very slow breeders. It takes them at least 3 years before they're sexually mature, before they're able to breed. So although they can have 5 kits, it takes them a long time to get there. And the pine marten's lifespan is around 10 years. So she'll have 4 or 5 really good seasons, hopefully, if there's plenty of food for her. So where do they, delayed implantation, that's what that process, is called. So where do they have their kits? Well, they have their kits in dens. Dens are usually tree cavities in big ancient trees like this one here. And if you have a wee look, there's actually a pine marten using this wee den. Isn't that nice? Isn't that good there? Obviously a wee trick, but that's just to illustrate the kind of dens, the kind of habitat that pine martens need to den in. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of our ancient woodland, which I'll talk about a wee bit later on, but it means that we're losing a lot of our woodland that has these natural denning cavities. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll put up artificial nesting boxes for them, just like a big bird box, but specifically for pine martens. And this is what one looks like. There's a hole just on the other side of the box there. So the pine marten, they can climb up and they can use the den, and they can use that for breeding in the springtime. But also they'll use their dens in the wintertime too. It's important that these animals, have refuge from all the elements and the harshness of winter. So it's, maybe in that picture there's a little pine marten curled up with its big tail wrapped around it. So where are pine martens found? So pine martens are found mostly all across Europe, where the big green bit is, all the way to the Ural Mountains in Russia, and the furthest west they are is on the west coast of Ireland. It's fairly common on the continent and wherever there is woodland, and it's listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List, so it's doing quite well on the continent. Now, unfortunately, pine martens in Britain and Ireland were once very widespread, but in recent years, that's not the case. In fact, they nearly went extinct in an atrocious decline in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. As this quote here from the Mammal Society states, they're isolated small pockets in Britain now. In fact, they've actually gone extinct in England altogether, although they've recently been reintroduced and starting to come back, which is great. But it's been a very, very similar story in Ireland as well. They were once widespread, but have declined massively. Although it's thought that they hung on in Ireland for a wee bit longer. They hung on to kind of the early 20th century, and then they declined massively. Unfortunately, we don't have any good baseline science to indicate that. But what we do have here is a study that was done in the 70s, 80s by O'Sullivan. And what he did is he went out looking for pine martens. Obviously couldn't find very many because they're very elusive and nocturnal. So what he did was he looked for the scats. And so here, this is a map of where he was looking for these pine marten scats. And the black squares are where he found scats, and the gray squares where he went looking, but didn't find any. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a map of Northern Ireland's data included too, because he did do surveys in Northern Ireland, but only found pine martens present in County Fermanagh. And as you can see there, unfortunately, in the areas he surveyed, he only found pine martens in 28% of the places that he surveyed. So they'd gone from an animal that was once thought to be all across the island of Ireland, but is actually surviving in little fragmented pockets. So what happened? What happened to our pine martens? Well, unfortunately, like a lot of things, habitat lost. There was massive deforestation in Britain and Ireland in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and we've lost 95% of our native woodlands. So being a woodland specialist, pine martens suffered heavily and managed to survive in isolated pockets of woodland, but were almost wiped out. And in the case of England, they were wiped out. One of the big problems now in the kind of woodland situation in Northern Ireland, only about 6% of our land cover is forest, and only 0.2% of that is ancient woodland. So that habitat that's important for the denning pine martens is almost completely gone. And ancient woodland's much, much better for our pine martens because it has a much better variety of food sources. Those eggs, the berries, the mushrooms, all that good stuff. There's more of that in our ancient woodland. And unfortunately, in Northern Ireland, 4% of our land cover is this kind of plantation, which has very, very young trees, and they're all the same age, and there isn't the denning cavities for them. So our woodland that we have isn't as good for pine martens, but the ancient woodland is better, and that's what we've lost. Another reason for the decline is that they were heavily persecuted, especially in the 1800s. They were shot readily by gamekeepers to protect poultry and game birds, but also they were sought after for their fur, especially their dense winter coats were brilliant for making coats because they were very good at keeping people warm. Unfortunately, pine martens are incredibly vulnerable to persecution, and because they live at such low densities, it takes a long time for pine martens to kind of move into new areas. And because it takes them a long time to become sexually mature to breed, it's very, very difficult for them to recover quickly. So whenever they're persecuted, it has a big, big impact upon their population. Now, normally, whenever you're given a species talk like this for conservation charity, you kind of really go in and lay thick how bad, how in trouble species are. Well, I have the absolute pleasure of saying that pine martens is a case in the complete opposite. Both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic, pine martens have shown to have made a significant recovery, which is fantastic. So how did we find out about this? Well, there is an ongoing kind of survey that's happening called the All Ireland Squirrel Survey. And this is the results from 2007 and 2012. And what they did was they basically used little plastic tubes and baited them with food and then put glue on the inside of the plastic tubes. And then what this meant is when the squirrels would come into the tube, they'd feed on the food and their hairs would get stuck to the glue. And this meant that you can analyze the hairs and look for the DNA. And it turned out that this actually not only was a good way to record gray squirrels and red squirrels, but it was also a really good way to record pine martens. And so you can see here that they were found in 2007, and then in 2012, there were actually more dots there on the map. More pine martens were found in more places. And you can see just the difference in those 5 years in the amount of pine martens that were being recorded. And then again, the survey was so successful finding pine martens, it was actually renamed the All Ireland Red Squirrel and Pine Marten Survey. And this is the results from the 2019 survey. Excuse me. And you can see there's even more dots on the map. And it's especially, amazing to see this change when you compare it to that old 70s, 80s maps. Remember, it's just those black dots. To see now that it's becoming much more widespread all across the island of Ireland, which is fantastic. So why has this species recovered? Well, the answer is we don't really know. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. Scientists doesn't have all the answers for anything. A quick caveat is that potentially because they are so elusive and nocturnal, they have been recovering quite steadily for a while. We just haven't noticed, and it's just because these big surveys were being done that actually managed to pick it up. But one of the other possible reasons is that they're being protected now. There's legislative protections in place to protect these animals, and also lots of pesticides and rodenticides have been banned. And that's important too, because pine martens scavenge dead animals. And so whenever they come across a poisoned rat, they'll pick that up and have that to eat. So the most dangerous chemicals have been banned, and that might potentially be one of the reasons why pine martens have recovered quite well. Now, not to put a dampener on such a good conservation news story, but there could well be challenges with pine marten recovery, especially if they recover, they keep spreading with the kind of increases that I've shown there in that wee map system. They will, come into contact with humans much more, and eventually they could well come into conflict with humans too. They will probably take chickens and game because they are opportunistic predators. And they will also scavenge. They scavenge food whenever they can, so they could potentially become a nuisance and scavenge from our bins. This is a class wee picture. You can see wee pine marten pulling his head out of that bin there. Maybe they'll become super common like raccoons in the United States of America, and they'll just be found in every bin everywhere. They also potentially could den in places where we mightn't want them to den, such as our attics or maybe our garden sheds or whatever. So it's important that we kind of talk about pine martens and that we kind of put them in the public consciousness so people can be ready to, solve these problems before they really happen. It's possible to proof, attics to make sure that pine martens can't get in. We can put things in place so that they can't get into bins, and we can protect, our poultry, too, with setting up adequate kind of defenses. There's some wonderful solutions on this website here called pinemarten.ie, which has lots of information for poultry keepers, for foresters, for homeowners, everyone, there's lots of advice in there to help kind of look after your own resources from pine martens, because it's important that we learn to live with our predators. Our predators play a really important role in our ecosystems. So it's important that humans can get on with these things in the future. So, there could be challenges ahead, but there are solutions out there. So great stuff. Pine martens are recovering in Ireland. Brilliant to see. Pine martens are still, even though they're recovered quite well, they are still our rarest mammal. The Mammal Society estimates that on the island of Ireland, there's only around 2,700 of these animals, which isn't really a lot, but it's much more than it's thought to be what it was, 100 years ago. So it's brilliant to see them on the recovery. Now, how do pine martens kind of play into Ulster Wildlife's red squirrel work? This is interesting now. This is the good stuff, okay? So just in case if anyone's not aware, I'll just briefly surmise this. So we have the grey squirrel versus red squirrel conundrum. So invasive greys were introduced to Ireland in 1911, and there was only 12 greys were given as a wedding present to a rich estate owner in County Longford. And those 12 greys are what the whole grey population in Ireland has derived from. And this is a problem because our red squirrels get outcompeted by these grey squirrels. These big American bullies come in and take all their food. And also they've brought a disease called squirrel pox, which the grey squirrels are immune to, but is actually lethal for our red squirrels. And you can see kind of the dramatic change that has happened in the last 100 years from these two maps, which illustrates it quite well. I just want to focus there on Ireland. There on the left, you can see it's a very small kind of population of greys, and reds are very, very widespread. And then nowadays, grey squirrels are found all the way from County Antrim all the way down to County Cork. In fact, this map's actually out of date. They have made it to County Cork now. But I also want to draw your attention to the orange on the map, which indicates where grey and red squirrels are both found together. And you can see that Northern Ireland is mostly orange. And this is good because it means there's red squirrels there, but it's also bad because grey squirrels and red squirrels cannot coexist. Grey squirrels will always win this fight. So our red squirrels need protecting. Ulster Wildlife has been involved in red squirrel conservation in Northern Ireland for a number of years now, working with landowners and stakeowners to look after our red squirrels. We also conduct our red squirrel survey across Northern Ireland every 2 years it is now, and we'll be doing our red squirrel survey this summer. This is Katie putting out some camera traps for our red squirrel survey. And then also there is a massive volunteer effort across the country in order to help protect our red squirrels. I think there's 14 different dedicated red squirrel groups with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers dedicated to looking after our red squirrels. So a big thank you and shout out to them, because without them and their hard work, red squirrels would not be in such a good position as they are in. And I say they're in a good position. Their numbers seem to be on the increase. The All Ireland Squirrel Survey is showing that red squirrels are doing better, which is great. And our grey squirrels seem to be in decline, which is great for the red squirrels. I just want to highlight here from this particular map from a Northern Ireland perspective, in the All Ireland Presence Absence surveys, they didn't find any grey squirrels in Fermanagh, which is obviously a great conservation success story. In fact, we believe that although greys get sighted in Fermanagh every now and then, we believe there's no resident populations of greys left in Fermanagh. All the ones that are being seen are moving in and not surviving. So that's brilliant news for our red squirrels. Also, as you know, widespread now. As you know, pine martens are widespread now. But really what I want to highlight is that they appear to be quite dense in the kind of Midland counties, County Longford and Fermanagh, and in that little area here, there's an awful lot of blue dots. And coincidentally, if we compare that with the grey squirrel, the grey squirrel survey, that same area seems to be devoid of grey squirrels. So what's kind of going on there? That seems rather unusual. So we're very, very lucky that there's been a number of scientists working on the pine marten squirrel question now for nearly a decade and answering potentially what's actually going on. So I just want to highlight some of the research that has been going on. This is one that was published from, sorry, excuse me. This is work in Scotland that was published, which has some complex mathematical modeling, which I'll simplify for you. Essentially, wherever there was lots of good habitat and pine martens were able to access the habitat well, grey squirrels were less likely to be there. And whenever there was good habitat and pine martens were able to access that habitat well, red squirrels were more likely to be there. So this is kind of like empirical evidence that shows that there is a direct, correlation between pine martens and the decline of grey squirrels and the increase of red squirrels. And there's further research that's been done to kind of ask why this is the case. Why are pine martens having this negative effect on our grey squirrels and not red squirrels, not our red squirrels? So this is a paper comparing the frequency of grey squirrel and red squirrel remains in our pine marten scats. I believe this study was done across Northern Ireland as well. And basically it found that in nearly 12% of all of our pine marten scats, there was grey squirrels present, but there was only 5% red squirrels. So that's interesting. There seems to be something happening there where the pine martens are able to predate on the grey squirrels more than they are the red squirrels. But obviously they're still eating red squirrels. And yet whenever in the previous study, pine martens were in areas where red squirrels were doing really well. So if red squirrels are still being eaten, again, there's still questions to be had. So what's going on? Well, there's another paper done in Ireland to see how squirrels would behave to pine marten scent. So what they did was they put out squirrel feeders and monitored squirrels' behavior as they were feeding at those feeders. And then after a couple of weeks, what they did was they introduced the scent of a pine marten. And what they found was that the red squirrels behaved very, very differently. What happened was they didn't visit the feeders as often. And when they did visit the feeders, they didn't stay for very long. So it shows that red squirrels could smell the pine martens and then decided to spend less time at the feeders because they knew that there was a potential predator around. Whereas the grey squirrels showed no change in their behavior at all. They didn't care. They were as bold as brass. And that kind of makes sense because red squirrels have co-evolved with pine martens and have coexisted for thousands of years. So they know that pine martens are bad news for them. Whereas the grey squirrels in their native range in America, they don't have pine martens and they've only been in Ireland for 100 years. So they still don't really recognize pine martens as predators. So it goes to show here the importance of having our native predators in being resilient to invasive species because our native predators can help us control these invasive species. So it's good news for pine martens, and because it's good news for pine martens, it's also good news for our red squirrels too. It's great to see our natural ecosystems kind of restoring the natural order of the world. So yeah, wonderful stuff. And I just want to kind of finish up on this wee video here. Hopefully this will play. It might not, but it just kind of shows a very curious quizzical pine marten.
From Fermanagh, that one was filmed, Ross.
Is that Fermanagh?
That was Michael. Behind Michael's garden, for those of you that know Michael's garden.
Oh, you can only dream of having pine martens in my garden. Maybe they will in future, who knows? Pine martens could recover quite seem to be recovering quite well, and they're not in urban areas. And potentially maybe they will be in 100 years' time, but right now they're still found in those kind of isolated habitats in those woodlands. So it's brilliant to see pine martens recovering in Ireland. And as I said, because they are natural predators, they play an important role in our ecosystems in controlling our kind of our grey squirrels, turns out as well. So it's very, very important that we're kind of restoring the natural balance of the world, and pine martens are a part of that, and it's great to see them coming back. So yeah. So I'm afraid that's it for me tonight. Thank you very much for listening and coming along, everybody. We'll go through a few wee questions, and then I'll talk a wee bit about what's coming up next week on our series of talks. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough.
I've answered a couple of those questions, but we'll go through them from the start, sure. If you want to stop sharing there, and we'll do that.
Sure.
Bear with us, everyone. I'm currently isolating, and Ross isn't feeling too great either, so that's nothing too difficult, please.
What have we got here? What have you answered already?
So someone's just asked, is it quite difficult to find pine martens? So you've kind of said that in your talk anyway, but just the fact that they're mainly nocturnal and quite shy, so pretty elusive and difficult to see. I suppose most people maybe that'll have seen them will be on camera traps, because that's when we see most of them.
I have a question here from Joe Baird. Are there any concerns that the greys will become more aware of pine martens as predators? Potentially would be my answer to that. Potentially that could happen, but the reality is it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, because there are a lot of selection pressure, and it takes years and years for animals to kind of evolve these kind of responses. So potentially not the case. It'll be interesting to see how things go and how things develop, but as it stands, I don't think it'll be a risk anytime soon.
Ross, Philip has asked about pine martens in owl populations. So this is an interesting one for us, in as we also work on barn owls. But you've mentioned here long-eared owls. Now, we don't have any evidence of them predating long-eared owls, because long-eared owls normally nest really high up, and it's not something we've known or heard about, but we definitely know that it's just the real start of kind of the crossover of pine martens and barn owls. There's not that many places in the UK where the two coexist. So we have caught a couple on camera traps inspecting barn owl nests. Now, we've no evidence of predation, because I think the barn owls are pretty good at defending themselves because they're pretty big. And we think it's more likely that they like the look of the barn owl nest boxes because they're similar to where they would den. But it's definitely something that we'll keep an eye on. There's a few questions about areas, but people have answered that. So have they been recorded at Carrick, Moran Park? So yeah, I mean, basically anywhere you want to think of, they're basically there now. They're just popping up everywhere, and it's more than likely if there's a patch of forest, there's probably a pine marten in it now.
Crossed. I have a question here. On Brownsea Island, the red squirrels have leprosy. Is this a problem here in Northern Ireland? I'm not sure. I don't think it is.
No, so I wrote an answer to that, so because a few people were mentioning it. It has been found in Britain, so there's small amounts of cases of it. It's a strange one. Red squirrels are the only known rodent in the whole of the UK and Britain for it to exist in, so it doesn't affect greys, but the symptoms are quite similar to squirrel pox. So I think sometimes maybe there's been things that people have thought were squirrel pox and could have actually been leprosy, but they don't think it exists in as, it's not as prevalent basically. So there's the odd case that comes up, but any ones that we've had tested, it's always been squirrel pox. So normally we send them away for testing. We've never had a case of leprosy, but it's just something, to definitely be aware of. These poor things that can't catch a break.
Definitely not. Should you report grey squirrel sightings? Yes, please report all your sightings of red squirrels, grey squirrels, and pine martens. All of them are very important species, and they all play a role in red squirrel conservation. But it's also great to know what our pine martens are doing. So yes, please report your sightings to CEDAR. There's also a little link on our website on the red squirrels to submit your red squirrel sightings. And grey squirrels as well, Kitty, is that correct?
Yes.
So actually, I'll try and find that link to put in the chat if you read out another question.
Yeah. And yes, we are developing a new system to make the recording of sightings easier. So hopefully that'll be live this year. I know we talked to quite a few of the squirrel groups about that already. Someone's just saying, is it likely that because the red squirrels are lighter, they can go out to lighter branches to evade pine martens, so fear get caught? I mean, yeah, that was always the initial theory, but I think some of the research is actually changing that. That is probably a bit of the case, because I think we find pine martens are very opportunistic, which basically means they're lazy and they'll just eat what's in front of them, and they don't want to really, no animal wants to go out of its way to try and catch something. So the harder something is to catch, the more it'll avoid it. But yeah, there's lots of other kind of research that Ross talked about that's come out to kind of say that that's maybe not the only reason.
There we go. I've just put that link into the report a sighting section on the Ulster Wildlife Red Squirrels page. If you do see any red and grey squirrels, go to there to submit your sightings.
Someone's asked, are there any project schemes for pine martens in Northern Ireland? No, I mean, we include pine marten conservation in our red squirrel work, so that's something ongoing. We're about to release our red squirrel strategy for Northern Ireland, and one of those is to do with pine marten conservation. I mean, to be honest, they're kind of doing all right on their own, so there's not a lot we really need to do, but there are certain areas where they benefit from nesting or den boxes. There's certain places where they're more abundant, and either they lack the denning places, or it's because they do become a bit of a nuisance and they start denning in people's houses. So in the likes of Fermanagh and things, den boxes doesn't work really well. But I know there's a project in Slieve Gullion with the council there where they're putting up boxes, and a few others around the country. But yeah, pine marten conservation is definitely something that we're moving forward with.
There's lots of the red squirrel groups across Northern Ireland as well will monitor pine martens too. So there's lots of eyes on the ground for these animals to see how things change and how things develop and how much conservation effort they might need in the future. Maria asked, do fast-growing monoculture pine forests pose a threat to pine martens and red squirrels? I'm presuming you mean forest plantation. Potentially, there was some research out there that indicated that red squirrels and pine martens don't do so well in those habitats. Although you say pine forests, Scots pine's actually a native tree that the red squirrels do really well in. So I would love a plantation of pine trees, would be class. Potentially, we talk about it a little bit in our kind of red squirrel strategy about kind of planting native broadleaf woodland in areas where grey squirrels aren't abundant. So that's hopefully something in the future that can be addressed.
Someone's asking how to get involved with the group, so I've just put a link there to our website, and that'll link you to all the groups that are acting, and there should be you should be able to see if there's any in your local area. I'm sure, I mean, I know a few of them are on tonight, so I'm sure they would be very welcome to have you for whatever group you want to join.
Brilliant. Glad to hear people wanting to get involved. Should we leave food for the pine marten that comes into the garden? If so, what? I imagine that's up for discussion, but my advice would be no. They're wild animals. Let them learn how to find their own food. Maybe you could coax them in with a few peanuts every now and then, but Don't make them reliant on you for food. We want wild animals to stay wild, and it's important that these animals are able to find their own food. It's a problem happening now with a lot of our garden birds. Our garden birds are reliant on bird feeders, so whenever someone moves away, local populations of birds can be affected heavily. So just small supplementary feeding if you want to do it, but not a constant food source.
Yeah, that's probably right. And if you want to do it, it'd probably good to do it in periods of bad weather, maybe when their food's not likely to be abundant or when they'd be struggling. Is really a time that you could do it.
Grant. There were pine martens in the forest beside me. The council did significant work. To what extent is their habitat protected? Well, pine martens are found in all sorts of woodland, good quality woodland, bad quality woodland. So a lot of our ancient woodlands are kind of protected or managed effectively. You know, it's a hard one to kind of answer. Pine martens habitats aren't specifically protected, but there's legislative protection against, you know, affecting denning pine martens, and also, you know, in catching the animal itself, but not its habitats specifically, because they are found in a wide range of woodlands.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. They're protected under the wildlife order, so yeah, I suppose. Yeah, technically it's a offence to kill the pine marten or to disturb its resting place, but there's probably what people would just argue was, well, there was no pine martens there at the time when we cut the trees down. So that is a difficult one. So if, you know, we would normally advise if someone was wanting to object to woodland felling in any way, that they need evidence of pine marten there. So putting up a camera trap and monitoring and getting evidence that they're there to try and back it up. It doesn't always work, but it might help. It might help the time of year that they do the felling, and it might require them to plant trees somewhere else or put up a den box somewhere else. So who knows? But yeah, you need proof before anyone could you could stop anything, really.
David's asked, do they hibernate? No, I don't believe they do. They're not as active in the winter time because there's not as much food, but they don't hibernate like hedgehogs do, for example. They still go out and find food. You know, the last brambleberries, whatever, nuts and seeds, and obviously predate on small birds and hopefully grey squirrels.
They just get sleepier like the rest of us, same as red squirrels. You know, they sleep more, it's cold. That's it, they slow down a bit for the winter.
Pam's asked, can pine martens be introduced in the grey infested areas to help local reds? Probably not. No, I don't think that would be very viable. Because pine martens have a huge range, so they'll move an awful lot, is the first one. So you couldn't guarantee that they'd stay in any particular area. Two, you know, there isn't kind of a captive breeding program for pine martens in this country, so there wouldn't be any animals to release. And three, pine martens are spreading on their own, and as we've been showing, they're widespread. So it's only a matter of time that they come into woodlands if they're not already there secretly. So no on that one.
Yeah, I mean, currently there's not a real justification in Northern Ireland, as Ross says, to do that because they're already moving around. I mean, there's been recent reintroductions of them in Wales, but that's really where they've been nowhere near there. So it's going to take a very long time before they move there naturally, where our kind of surveys show and all the evidence shows that they're kind of everywhere, and it's just a matter of time. It's not likely that they're going to be in the areas without woodland, so the likes of Belfast and things, but then we can't release them because they've nowhere to go and they'll just leave. So unfortunately, yeah, not everywhere is suitable for them, but they're doing the best they can to move around themselves.
Ronald's just said there in the chat that a pine marten that was reintroduced to Wales moved 50 miles away from its original release site, so it just goes to show they don't They won't stay where you want them to. How old are the kits when they become independent, and do they then have to move away from mum for their own territory? Yes, so no, they'll stay with their mother. They're born in the spring. They stay with their mother through the summer, autumn, and winter, and then the following spring, the mother will begin to push them out and get them to look for their own territories. The females are kind of more tolerant of each other than the males, so the males especially will be pushed out and they'll have to go establish their own territory, or maybe take over a territory from someone else if they're young and strong enough. But yeah, so basically a year old is when they have to move on, whenever the mum's looking to have her next set of babies. Shauna asks, is it illegal to hunt pine martens? Yes, under the Northern Ireland Wildlife Order, it's illegal to hunt and kill our pine martens.
We might have covered them all. If anyone does have any more questions or wants to chat anything pine marten related, you can, I'll maybe just put Ross's email and my email in here. If anyone's not brave enough, but feel free, you can go off mute if anyone wants to ask a question. And if not, well, you can follow up.
Lovely stuff. Okay, well, I'm just going to share the end of the wee presentation there again, just to show what's on next week. That's not next week. That's there we go. Next week. So next week in Ulster Wildlife Talks, we are doing how farmers are delivering for nature. A brilliant good news story there, hosted by Peter McIlwarth, our director for land management. So go to the website and sign up if you sound interested in that. And then also, if you were a non-member tonight and you paid to come on the talk, one of the benefits of being a member is that you can get these talks for free. So if you're interested in becoming a member and supporting our wildlife conservation, go to the website there and have a look and see if you want to join. And keep in touch with us on all of our social media. And even just if you can't be a member, following us on our social media is another way to support Ulster Wildlife. It does wonders for us. So thank you very much, everybody.
We missed one question, sorry.
Yes.
Someone's just asking it again there. Just, are there mink in Northern Ireland and have they impacted on squirrel or pine marten? Yes, we do have American mink. They are everywhere. They definitely are a problem. As opposed to their issues with squirrel and pine marten, not really. They impact more kind of riparian and river species, so they definitely have impacted otter and birds and things in that area, so definitely have other issues, but pine martens are pretty much the same from mink, we think, but who knows with invasive species. And someone just said, will it be on YouTube? Yeah, it should be. I think normally the members talks get sent out to just members for a while, and then after that it should be on YouTube, but you should get a link to it anyway if you want to watch it back.
Yeah, anyone who signed up for this talk will get an email for this after it finishes, probably sometime tomorrow. So yeah,
thanks
lovely
everyone
stuff. Thank you very much for joining. All the best. Great to see so many people.